The night was dark and endless. The winds screamed across the frozen wasteland, carrying sharp pieces of ice that could cut skin like knives. Evan sat alone inside his small wooden hut, deep in the middle of nowhere, his rough hands holding a cracked old cup filled with weak, lukewarm tea. The fire in the stone fireplace struggled to stay alive. Every time the wind howled harder, the flames shivered like they might die any second. Evan pulled his old jacket tighter around him. He was used to the cold. After years of living on this alien planet, he had learned to survive when others had given up and left. Outside, the blizzard roared louder. The walls of the hut shook as if invisible hands were trying to rip them apart. Snow pushed through the cracks in the wood. Evan just sipped his tea, calm, tired, and ready for another endless night. But then a sound broke through the wind. A thud, something heavy hitting the door. Evan froze. He listened. Another thud, softer this time, followed by what sounded like weak scratching. Someone or something was out there. Slowly, Evan stood up, grabbing the old hunting knife he kept near the fireplace. He moved to the door silently. For a moment, he thought about ignoring it. Nobody sane would be out there in this storm. If it was an animal, he didn't want it inside. If it was something worse, well, he would deal with it. The scratching grew weaker, almost desperate. A small voice cried out, a sound so soft, almost swallowed by the wind. His instincts kicked in. Whatever was out there wasn't a threat. It was begging for help. Evan opened the door. A blast of freezing air slammed into him. Snow poured into the hut like a white river. But through the swirling snow, he saw her. A small figure, covered in torn cloth and frost, stumbling forward blindly. Without thinking, Evan reached out. The figure collapsed into his arms. It was a girl. No, not quite human. Her skin was a pale silver-blue color, almost glowing under the weak firelight. Her hair was a tangled mess of shimmering white strands, and her body was frighteningly cold to the touch. She was gasping, eyes half closed. She looked half dead. Evan carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him. He gently placed her near the fire, grabbing the thickest blanket he had and wrapping it around her trembling form. For a moment, all he could hear was her shaky breathing and the wild cry of the storm outside. Then, she opened her eyes, golden, bright, and full of terror. The alien girl stared at Evan's face. Her entire body stiffened under the blanket. Her breathing grew faster, more panicked. She scrambled backward on the wooden floor, hands clawing at the ground, knocking over a wooden chair. Evan took a step back, holding his hands up to show he meant no harm. But it was too late. The girl screamed, a raw, broken sound, and tried to push herself further away. Her voice was strange, speaking in a language Evan didn't understand, full of fear and confusion. Hey, easy, Evan said softly, but it didn't matter. She couldn't understand him. And even if she could, she clearly didn't trust him. She kept babbling in her alien tongue, eyes darting around the hut like a trapped animal. Evan stayed completely still, not wanting to scare her more. His mind raced. Why was she so terrified of him? He had done nothing threatening. He had only saved her from the storm. As he watched her shaking in fear, something else caught his eye. Marks on her arms. Faint, but clear even in the weak firelight. They were scars. Long, thin scars like the result of years of chains or rough bindings. His stomach twisted. This girl wasn't just running from the storm. She was running from something much worse. He kneeled down slowly, keeping a safe distance. His voice was calm, almost like talking to a frightened animal. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." She didn't understand the words, but maybe she felt the tone. Her breathing slowed just a little. Her golden eyes still watched him with suspicion, but the pure panic had lessened by a fraction. The fire crackled quietly between them. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the small hut, a fragile silence settled. A silence heavy with fear, mistrust, and the first trembling seeds of something new. Trust. Somewhere far beyond the howling storm, unknown dangers waited. But for tonight in this tiny battered hut, two lonely souls had found each other. Strangers, enemies perhaps by blood, but brought together by the cold and a desperate need to survive. And neither knew that this meeting would change both of their lives forever. The storm outside screamed louder, as if angry that the hut had denied it entry. Snow slapped against the wooden walls like furious fists. But inside, everything was still, except for the alien girl and Evan, caught in a fragile moment that could shatter at any second. The girl sat curled against the far wall, wrapped tightly in the blanket Evan had given her. Her silver-blue skin shimmered in the firelight, but her golden eyes stayed locked on Evan with deep suspicion and fear. She whispered something under her breath in her strange language, sharp, quick words filled with emotion. Evan couldn't understand her, but he could hear the trembling in her voice. She was scared beyond reason. Slowly, carefully, Evan crouched down, keeping his hands open and low to the ground. "No harm," he said quietly. "You're safe." Of course she didn't understand. She flinched at his voice, clutching the blanket tighter around herself as if it were her only shield. Evan stayed still, thinking, how could he show her he wasn't a threat? Then he remembered. Food. He moved slowly toward the battered shelf near the fireplace, pulling out a small metal tin. Inside were hard biscuits, dry but edible. He placed one biscuit gently on the floor halfway between them and backed away. The alien girl watched every movement with sharp, wary eyes. Minutes passed. Neither of them moved. The fire cracked and spat small sparks. The blizzard howled outside. And then, very slowly, the girl reached out a trembling hand from under the blanket and snatched the biscuit. She brought it to her mouth cautiously, sniffed it, then took a tiny, desperate bite. Evan watched quietly. His heart ached at the sight. She must have been starving. As she chewed, some of the wild panic faded from her face. Her body relaxed a little, though she kept glancing at Evan nervously between bites. Evan took another biscuit from the tin and bit into it himself, making sure she saw him. He smiled. Just a small, tired smile. For a moment, just a heartbeat, her golden eyes softened, but it didn't last. Suddenly, she clutched her side and winced. A wet stain spread on the blanket, dark and worrying. Evan's smile disappeared. He realized with a sinking feeling. She was hurt. He stepped forward instinctively. The girl reacted instantly, pulling a small, sharp knife from inside her clothing and pointing it at him with shaking hands. Evan froze, hands up again. Okay, easy," he said calmly. The blade wobbled in her grip. She was weak, barely able to hold it, but the determination in her eyes was fierce. She would fight if she had to. She would die if she had to. Evan stayed very still. He pointed gently at her bleeding side, then pointed to a roll of bandages he had hanging by the fireplace. "I can help," he said slowly, his voice low and steady. The alien girl stared at him for a long moment. Her breathing was fast and shallow. She looked at the bandages, then at him, then back at the door. Evan understood that look. She was thinking about running again, out into the deadly blizzard, just to get away from him. He shook his head slowly and pointed to the door. Then he made a big X with his arms. "No, not safe," he said. He pointed to the fire, then at her wound, and made a clumsy bandaging motion. Her knife hand trembled. For long seconds, everything hung in balance. The storm outside roared like a living beast. Inside, the small fire flickered, low, finally. With a shaky breath, the girl lowered her knife. Not completely. She still kept it ready. But she allowed him to move closer. Very slowly, Evan approached, tearing a strip of bandage free with his teeth. His hands worked gently, carefully, as he peeled the blanket away from her side. The wound was nasty. A deep, ugly gash running along her ribs, probably caused by some kind of weapon. The edges of the cut were burned slightly, like it had been made by a hot blade. Evan worked fast but gentle, cleaning the wound with a cloth and then wrapping the bandage snugly around her. The girl watched, every movement flinching sometimes, but she didn't stop him. When he finished, he sat back, giving her space again. She touched the new bandage with careful fingers, testing it. Her eyes met Evan's, still afraid, still unsure, but a little less lost. Evan gave her another tired, reassuring smile. "You'll be all right," he whispered, even though he knew she couldn't understand. The girl pulled the blanket tighter around herself again and leaned back against the wall. Exhausted, her eyelids drooped. Her body sagged with weariness. Within minutes, she fell into a deep, uneasy sleep. Evan stayed awake, sitting by the fire, keeping watch. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what had happened to her. He didn't even know if she would trust him when she woke up. But deep in his gut, Evan knew one thing for sure. Whoever had hurt her might still be out there, and they might come looking for her. And when they did, they would find Evan standing between them and this terrified visitor. The fire burned low, its warm light casting long, flickering shadows across the hut. The storm outside still screamed, but it sounded distant now, like a wild beast locked outside, unable to reach them. Evan sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his knife resting close by. He didn't dare sleep. His eyes stayed on the fragile figure huddled near the fire, the alien girl, wrapped tightly in a thick blanket, her silver-blue skin pale and bruised. She was sleeping, but not peacefully. Her body twitched from time to time. Her lips moved in silent words, maybe nightmares, maybe memories. Evan watched her closely. He knew trust didn't come easy, not for someone who had been hunted, wounded, and left to freeze. She didn't know him. She didn't know that he wasn't like the others she had escaped from. He couldn't blame her for being afraid. The night crawled by. Every creak of the hut, every howl of the wind made Evan tense. He wasn't worried for himself. He was worried for her. Hours later, as the first gray light of dawn slipped under the cracks of the door, the girl stirred. Her golden eyes blinked, open, confused, frightened. She pushed herself up slowly, wincing at the pain in her side. The blanket slipped a little, revealing the fresh bandage Evan had wrapped around her wound. Her eyes darted to Evan immediately. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply lifted his hands slowly and placed the knife on the ground, sliding it, away from himself, a clear message. "You're safe. I'm no threat." The girl watched him for a long time, her breathing shallow. Her fingers brushed against the hidden knife under the blanket. She could grab it. She could attack him now if she wanted. Evan made no move to stop her. He simply sat there, breathing quietly, showing her with every inch of his body that he wasn't here to hurt her. A strange silence filled the hut. Not an empty silence, but a heavy, meaningful one. A silence that said, "I will not harm you. You don't have to run." Slowly, very slowly, the alien girl shifted her position. She didn't grab the knife. She didn't attack. Instead, she pulled the blanket around her, tighter, and simply watched him. It was a small thing, tiny, barely anything at all. But to Evan, it was a victory, a silent truce. Minutes turned into hours. The storm outside began to die, the howling winds growing softer, less violent. Inside, life stirred. Evan moved carefully around the hut, lighting the stove, boiling some old rationed soup. The smell of food filled the small room. It wasn't much, thin broth and a few hard vegetables, but it was hot and it was enough. He poured the soup into 2 old metal bowls. One for himself, one for her. Evan placed her bowl on the floor, halfway, between them just like the biscuit last night. Then he backed away again, sitting down quietly. The girl stared at the bowl. Her face showed the battle inside her. Fear, suspicion, hunger. Finally, hunger won. She crawled forward, every movement cautious and tense, and picked up the bowl with shaking hands. She sniffed it carefully, then took a small, careful sip. The moment. The warm broth touched her lips, her body sagged in relief. She drank more, faster now, clutching the bowl tightly. Evan ate too, pretending not to watch her, giving her space. Little by little, the room warmed, not just from the fire, but from something else too. Something invisible. Something fragile. Trust. When the girl finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She sat there, holding the empty bowl, unsure what to do next. Evan smiled again. Small, honest, tired. He pointed at his own chest. "Evan," he said. Then he pointed at her, raising an eyebrow. The girl blinked. Confusion flickered in her golden eyes. Then understanding. She hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on her own chest. She spoke a single word. Soft, musical, strange. "Sira." Evan's smile widened slightly. "Sira," he repeated carefully. The girl, Sira, watched him say her name. Her lips twitched, almost as if she might smile back, but it vanished too quickly to catch. Still, Evan felt something shift between them, a connection. They didn't need a common language. They didn't need long speeches. In this frozen world where death prowled outside the walls, simple kindness spoke louder than words, and without knowing it, both Evan and Sira had crossed a bridge they hadn't even realized they were standing on a silent promise. We survived together, or not at all. Somewhere out there, beyond the quiet storm, the real danger was still waiting. But inside this little wooden hut, for the first time in what felt like forever, neither Evan nor Sira was alone, not anymore. The blizzard had weakened. No longer roaring like a beast, the wind now moaned softly, dragging long fingers across the frozen land. A heavy gray fog hung over the world outside the hut, thick and eerie, hiding whatever dangers might be out there. Inside, Evan checked his old rifle carefully. It was battered. The barrel was slightly bent. The trigger was sticky. But it was still a weapon, and right now, he might need it. Sira sat close to the fire, watching him with wide golden eyes. Her body was still weak, her side still aching under the fresh bandages. But her senses were sharp. Every small sound outside made her flinch. Her hand never strayed far from the small alien knife she kept hidden under her blanket. Something was wrong. Evan felt it too. It wasn't just the storm that had chased Sira here. It was something much worse. Suddenly Sira whispered a word, soft, almost like a breath. "Hunters." Evan turned to her, frowning. He crouched down beside her and spoke slowly, pointing outside. "Out there?" he asked. Sira nodded quickly, fear flashing in her eyes. Through broken words, gestures, and desperate expressions, Sira tried to explain. She spoke of beings, dark shapes that moved through storms faster than sight. They hunted without mercy. They didn't come for food. They didn't come for shelter. They came for her. Evan listened carefully. Every instinct he had screamed that she was telling the truth. Sira pointed at her scars, the ones Evan had noticed when he first helped her. She mimicked chains with her hands. She mimicked a collar around her neck. Evan's jaw tightened. Sira wasn't just a random traveler. She had escaped from somewhere or someone who had treated her like property, and now they wanted her back. Suddenly, tap, tap, tap. Evan stiffened. That wasn't the wind. Sira's head jerked up, ears straining. Another tap, this time louder, at the window. Evan crept to the window's edge, staying low. He peeked outside, barely lifting the ragged curtain. At first, he saw nothing but the thick gray fog swirling across the frozen ground. Then, movement. A shadow. No, two shadows, slipping through the mist like ghosts. Evan's heart pounded. He recognized their shape immediately, tall, too thin, almost stretched unnaturally. Their limbs bent the wrong way, their heads cocked sideways like broken dolls. And worst of all, their eyes. Even through the fog, Their eyes glowed a deep, hateful red. Sierra whimpered softly, clutching the blanket around herself. Evan closed the curtain carefully, moving back toward her. "They're here," he said, even though she already knew. The old hut groaned as the icy wind pressed against it. The wooden beams creaked and rattled. The hunters were circling. Evan moved fast now, his survival instincts taking over. He stacked old crates and furniture against the door. He checked the windows, stuffing cracks with cloth and broken boards. He handed Sierra a small knife from his belt, motioning for her to keep it close. Sierra gripped it tightly, her face pale but determined. The fire burned low, casting long, nervous shadows. Outside, the world was silent again. Too silent. Evan held his breath, then, bang. The door rattled violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Sierra cried out, shrinking back. Another bang, harder this time. Evan raised the rifle, aiming at the door. His hands were steady, his mind clear. He wasn't just fighting for himself now. He was fighting for her. The next bang cracked one of the door's old hinges. A splinter of wood flew across the room. Evan took a step forward, putting himself between the door and Sierra. If they wanted her, they would have to go through him first. The banging stopped. For a terrible moment, everything went dead quiet. Then Evan heard it. A scraping sound. Something climbing up the side of the hut. Something trying to come in through the roof. He spun around, aiming upward just as a skeletal hand burst through the ceiling, ripping apart the old wooden beams. Sierra screamed. Without thinking, Evan fired. The gunshot thundered inside the tiny hut. The hand jerked back, black blood splattering across the floorboards. The hut shook under the creature's retreating weight. But Evan knew they would be back. This was just the beginning. He turned to Sierra, who clutched the knife with white knuckles. "We stand together," Evan said, even though he knew she couldn't understand the words. But maybe she understood the look in his eyes. The promise. No matter what comes through that door, no matter what monsters crawl through the fog, he would not abandon her. Not now. Not ever. And outside, in the swirling gray mist, the hunters regrouped. Silent, patient, and merciless, waiting for their next attack. The hut groaned under the weight of the coming storm, not from snow but from the monsters waiting outside. Evan moved fast, heart pounding but hands steady. Every second counted. He grabbed whatever he could find, old chairs, a broken table, rusty metal tools, and jammed them against the door and windows. He tied ropes across the entrance, creating a crude barricade. It wouldn't stop the hunters forever, but it would slow them down. Sierra watched him, her body still weak, but her spirit rising. She clutched her small knife tightly, her golden eyes sharp with fear. And something else. Determination. The fire crackled low, barely keeping the chill away. Outside, the fog thickened. The world beyond the walls disappeared into a blanket of gray death. Evan checked his rifle. 1 bullet left. 1. He cursed under his breath. It would have to be enough. The first attack came without warning. A huge crash against the door sent splinters flying across the room. The barricade held. But, barely. Another hit. The walls shuddered. Evan raised the rifle and pointed at the door, his fingers steady on the trigger. Sierra crouched behind him, breathing hard but silent. The door cracked under another brutal blow. Then, a long, clawed arm punched through the wood, grasping wildly at the air. Evan didn't hesitate. Bang! The rifle roared, the shot tearing through the monster's limb. A horrible screech filled the hut as the creature yanked its bloody arm back into the fog. Evan quickly dropped the empty rifle. No time to reload. No other bullets. He grabbed an old metal shovel from the corner, gripping it like a weapon. The door sagged on broken hinges. The hunters were angry now. They wouldn't stop. They would tear the hut apart, piece by piece, to get to Sierra. Another crash, this time at the back wall. Wooden planks split open like rotten bones. A skeletal figure slithered through the gap, its red eyes burning like coals. Without thinking, Evan charged. He swung the shovel with all his strength. The metal edge slammed into the creature's face with a sickening crunch. It stumbled back, hissing, black blood pouring from its broken mouth, but more shadows moved behind it. 3, maybe 4. They were everywhere. Evan knew he couldn't hold them all off. Not alone. Suddenly Sira stood up. Her legs trembled, but her grip on the alien knife was steady. She stepped forward, standing beside Evan. Her eyes met his. No words were needed. Together. The next hunter lunged through the broken wall. Evan swung the shovel again, smashing its arm aside. Sira darted forward, her small body moving fast, slashing with the glowing blade. The creature howled in pain, falling back into the fog. Another one burst through the window. Glass exploded everywhere. Evan grabbed a burning piece of wood from the fire and hurled it at the creature's face. Flames caught on its skin and it screeched, flailing backward. For every monster they drove away, 2 more came. The small hut shook under the battle. Walls cracked. The ceiling sagged. Cold wind howled through every gap. But Evan and Sira fought, like trapped wolves, wild, desperate, and refusing to fall. The shovel bent under the force of Evan's swings. Sira's knife flashed in the firelight, cutting through gray flesh. Blood, black and steaming, splattered the floor. Still, they fought. Still they stood, until finally, a loud screech rang through the fog. The remaining hunters stopped, sensing something, a command. A retreat. Slowly, one by one, the red-eyed figures faded back into the mist, vanishing like ghosts. Silence fell. Evan leaned against the broken wall, breathing hard, his arms shaking with exhaustion. Sira dropped to her knees, clutching the blanket around her shivering body. The hut was nearly destroyed. The door hung by a single hinge. The roof was cracked open to the gray sky. But they were alive. They had survived. Evan sank down beside Sira, feeling the bruises forming on his body, the cuts stinging his skin. He looked at her, this fragile, fierce creature who had fought beside him without hesitation. Sira met his gaze, her golden eyes filled with pain and pride. Without thinking, Evan reached out. Sira hesitated, then placed her trembling hand in his. No words, no promises, just the quiet, powerful bond of 2 survivors who had fought, bled, and stood together against the darkness. Outside, the Yao, fog still swirled. But inside that broken hut, hope had not died. It had been forged, hammered in fire, shaped by blood, and sealed in trust. And whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The first light of dawn barely touched the broken land outside. The hut stood in ruins, its walls cracked, its roof torn open, but it was still standing, and so were they. Evan sat with his back against the broken doorframe, breathing hard, every muscle in his body screaming. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. His hands were raw and bruised. Across from him, Sira huddled under what was left of the thick blanket, her small body trembling from exhaustion and cold. But her spirit, her will, was unbroken. Evan wiped the blood from his eyes and looked out at the misty wasteland beyond the shattered walls. The hunters had pulled back, but not for long. He knew how predators worked. They weren't gone. They were regrouping, waiting for the next strike. This time, they wouldn't just claw and scratch. This time, they would tear everything apart. Evan tightened his fists. He had seen monsters before, on Earth, on alien planets, in places where the weak were eaten and the strong ruled without mercy. But never had he felt rage burn through him. Like this, not for himself, for her, for Sira, the girl who had suffered, who had fought beside him, who had trusted him when she had every reason to run. They thought they could come here and take her? Not while he was breathing. Outside, shapes moved in the mist. Dozens. Maybe more. Evan stood up, swaying slightly but finding his balance. Sira looked up at him, fear flashing across her golden eyes. But Evan wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He picked up the bent, blood-stained shovel and slammed the metal head against the ground. Clang! The sound echoed through the broken world like a battle cry. Sira flinched, but then she watched him with wide, amazed eyes. This was not the quiet man who had offered her food. This was something else. Something the hunters had never seen before. Human's fury. Evan moved fast, faster than pain could catch him. He pulled the last bottles of oil from under the stove. He tore old rags into strips, tying them around pieces of broken wood. Makeshift torches, makeshift weapons. He handed one to Sira, who clutched it uncertainly. He pointed at the fire, then at the torches. Sira understood. Together, they lit the torches. Small flames danced in the cold morning air. Fire, the first weapon of mankind, the oldest weapon, and the deadliest. The fog outside shifted. A low, terrible howl rose from the mist. They were coming. Evan stood at the shattered doorway, his broken shovel in one hand, a burning torch in the other. He looked down at Sira, who stood beside him, her small frame wrapped in tattered blankets, her alien knife in hand, her face pale but fierce. "You ready?" he asked. She didn't understand the words, but she nodded. The first hunter charged out of the mist, its long claws slashing the air. Evan didn't wait. He roared, a sound ripped from the deepest part of his soul, and hurled the torch straight into the creature's chest. Fire exploded across its thin body. The hunter screamed, writhing and stumbling backward into the fog, setting others on fire with it. Another hunter lunged through the broken wall. Evan met it head-on, swinging the shovel with savage force. The metal edge cracked bone, the impact shaking his arms. Sira darted forward, slashing with her knife, her movements fast and sharp. They fought like a storm, wild, furious, unstoppable. More creatures poured from the mist, shrieking and howling. Evan grabbed a burning piece of wood and swung it in wide arcs, forcing them back. One by one, the monsters fell, burned, broken, beaten back by pure human rage and stubbornness. Evan fought without thinking, without fear. Every cut, every bruise only made him stronger. Sira fought too, fearless now, standing beside him like a flame against the darkness. Together they pushed back the nightmare. The ground outside the hut was littered with the blackened remains of the hunters. The mist began to break. The sun, weak and pale, struggled over the frozen horizon. The hunters howled one last time, an ugly, bitter sound, and fled into the fog, leaving behind only silence and the smell of burning flesh. Evan dropped to one knee, gasping for breath, the shovel slipping from his bloody hands. Sira ran to him, helping him up with trembling arms. He looked at her, this strange, fierce girl from another world, and saw pride shining in her golden eyes. They had survived, not because of luck, not because of weapons, because of fire, because of fury, because no monster, no hunter, no nightmare could match the rage of a human fighting for someone they had vowed to protect. Evan smiled through the blood and the pain. The sun rose higher, casting long golden rays over the broken land. And in that light, two figures stood side by side. A man and an alien girl, bound by blood, by fire, and by a silent, unbreakable promise. We fight together. We survive together. No matter what comes. Next. The storm had finally died. The cold wind no longer screamed, it whispered. The mist cleared slowly like a curtain lifting after a long, cruel play. The land around the broken hut was a frozen graveyard. Dark shapes of fallen hunters lay twisted and still, their black blood staining the white snow. Pieces of broken wood, burnt cloth, and scorched earth told the story of the fierce battle that had taken place. And in the middle of it all, Evan and Sira stood together. They were covered in dirt, blood, and ash. Their bodies ached. Their clothes were torn. But they were alive, and more importantly, they were not alone. Evan dropped the broken shovel to the ground. His hands were shaking now, not from fear but from pure exhaustion. His face was bruised and cut, but his eyes still burned with quiet strength. Sira stumbled beside him, her small body shivering from the cold and the wounds she had suffered. But when she looked up at Evan, a tiny, trembling smile touched her lips. She had seen his fury, she had seen his fire, and she had seen something else too. Something she never thought she would find in this brutal universe. Kindness, protection, hope. Evan knelt down carefully, pulling his old jacket off his shoulders. Without a word, he wrapped it around Sira, shielding her from the bitter cold. Sira clutched the jacket tightly, feeling the warmth left by him, and something deep inside her heart stirred, a feeling she had almost forgotten. Trust. Evan sat back, on the snow, breathing heavily, watching the sun rise higher in the frozen sky. Golden light spread across the endless white fields, making the world look almost beautiful again. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, the horizon was clear. No monsters, no storms, just silence and a new day beginning. Sira moved closer to him, dragging the heavy jacket around her small frame. She sat beside him, shivering, but stronger now. She pointed at herself and whispered, "Sira." Evan smiled faintly. "I know," he said gently. Then he pointed to himself. "Evan." Sira nodded slowly. Her golden eyes studied him with a mixture of wonder and confusion. She said something in her language, soft musical words Evan couldn't understand, but he understood the meaning. She was thanking him. She was pledging herself to him in the only way she knew how. He placed his hand over his heart, bowing his head slightly in return. The two of them sat there quietly, watching the sun rise together. The ruins of the hut behind them no longer mattered. The scars on their bodies no longer mattered. The frozen wasteland around them no longer mattered. What mattered was simple. They had found each other. In a world that had tried to crush them. In a universe that believed kindness was weakness. They had proven something far stronger. Survival wasn't just about fighting, it was about protecting, it was about trust. It was about never giving up on someone who needed you. Sira leaned her head lightly against Evan's arm, her body still trembling but her spirit at peace. Evan didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply sat there, letting her rest against him, feeling the warmth of her small presence in the freezing air. The snow fell softly now, gentle and light, covering the ground in a fresh, clean blanket. A new beginning, a new promise. They would find shelter. They would find food. They would survive, together. And whatever monsters the universe sent next, Evan would face them all, not because he had to, but because he had made a silent promise. In the middle of a broken hut, with nothing but a dying fire and a frightened girl, "You are not alone anymore. I will protect you. I swear it, no matter what." As the morning light bathed them in gold, Evan and Sira sat side by side in the endless snow, two souls from different worlds, bound together by fate, fire, and an unbreakable bond. And somewhere, deep in the frozen silence, hope was reborn.